There's a 7-year-old girl standing in a diner at midnight, emptying 8 crumpled dollars onto a counter to save a man who could break the room in half with his bare hands. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The biker with the outlaw patch and the bruised jaw stared down at that little pile of bills like they were the most dangerous thing he'd ever seen. And he'd seen plenty. That little girl's name was Sadie Vale. And what she did that freezing Nevada night didn't just buy a stranger a plate of eggs. It set something in motion that nobody, not the biker, not her mother, not the entire chapter behind him, could have predicted. Stay until the end of this one. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. This story is going to stay with you. The diner had no name worth remembering. It sat off Route 93 like something the highway had tried to shake loose over the years. A low concrete building with a crooked neon sign that buzzed "Open" in red letters. One of them flickering badly enough that, from a distance, it read just OPE, which felt about right for this stretch of Nevada. The parking lot was cracked asphalt and dead weeds. The windows were steamed from the inside. The wind coming off the desert at 11:30 on a Tuesday in late November didn't care about any of it. It came anyway, cold and indifferent, and carrying a fine grit that got into everything: eyes, teeth, the seam between a jacket collar and the back of your neck. Rowan Vale was on her 7th hour of a 9-hour shift. She was 31 years old and looked 38 in the fluorescent light of the kitchen pass-through. Not because she was vain about it. She had stopped being vain about most things sometime around the second eviction notice and hadn't found her way back to it. Her hair was pulled into a knot that had been neat at 4 in the afternoon and was falling apart now, strands of dark auburn escaping in every direction. Her feet hurt. They always hurt by this hour. She had a pair of thick-soled shoes she'd bought at a discount pharmacy 3 months ago, and they had seemed like a luxury then. Now the left one had a seam that pressed against her smallest toe with a precision she was beginning to think was personal. The diner was almost empty. A trucker named Dennis, who always sat at the counter and always ordered the same thing, and always tipped exactly $1 regardless of the bill, was nursing a coffee at the far end. 2 teenage girls in the back booth were splitting a plate of fries and laughing about something on one of their phones, and they had been there for 2 hours off a single order. Rowan had stopped thinking about that. She needed the booth more than she needed the $4 sale, and they weren't bothering anyone. The other waitress, Carmen, had called in sick at 6. That meant Rowan was alone out front, and the cook, a quiet man named Pete, who wore the same gray t-shirt every shift, was the entire kitchen. It was fine. Most nights were like this. Most nights she got through them. She was refilling the salt shakers, a task she had developed a kind of meditative focus about, something to do with her hands while her brain went somewhere quieter, when she heard it. Not thunder. Not yet. The sound was low and mechanical and singular. One engine. Coming off the highway and pulling into the lot with a heaviness that was different from the truckers. She recognized it without knowing why. There was a quality to a motorcycle's approach that didn't sound like anything else. The way it decelerated. The idle. The silence when it finally cut. Then boots on asphalt. Then the door opened. The 2 girls in the back booth stopped laughing. Dennis at the counter turned on his stool, looked, and turned back around very deliberately, as though he had decided he had not seen what he'd just seen. Pete, visible through the pass-through, glanced up and then went back to wiping the grill. The man who walked in was large in the way that made a room feel smaller. Not just tall. Rowan had seen tall. He was dense with something, as though gravity pressed on him differently. He moved slowly, favoring his right leg, and she clocked the limp immediately, the way you clock things when you've been reading rooms for 7 years. His leather cut was old and worn to softness at the elbows, black with colored patches she couldn't read from this distance. His knuckles were the color of storm clouds, purpled and swollen across at least 2 of them. His jaw was worse. The right side of his face held a bruise that had gone from purple to the yellow-green of something trying to heal and not quite managing. His hair was dark, close-cropped. He was maybe 40, maybe 45. It was hard to tell through all of it. He stood just inside the door for a moment like he was calculating something, and then he walked to a stool at the counter, the far end, away from Dennis, and sat down with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body was lodging formal complaints. Rowan picked up her order pad and walked over. The patch on his back read Iron Penance MC. Below it, Nevada. She had heard of them. Hadn't everyone who'd grown up in this part of the state? The name came attached to the usual things. Bar fights, highway incidents, a loyalty code that outsiders described as either impressive or terrifying depending on which side of it they'd landed on. She had never had an opinion about them. She had never had occasion to form one. She had one now, forming whether she wanted it or not. "What can I get you?" she said. He looked at the menu on the counter without picking it up. Eggs, over easy, toast, coffee. Sure. She wrote it down. He didn't look up again. She went to the pass-through, clipped the ticket, came back with the coffee pot. He wrapped both hands around the mug when she set it down and said nothing. His hands were enormous. The bruised knuckles whitened slightly where they pressed against the ceramic. She went back to the salt shakers. The girls in the back booth had resumed talking, but quieter now, and they kept looking toward the counter. Dennis finished his coffee, left his dollar, and left. Rowan heard his truck start in the parking lot and pull away. The quality of the silence in the room changed without him in it. She was aware of it the way you're aware of a draft when it's coming from somewhere you can't identify. Pete put the plate up at the pass-through and rang the bell. She carried it over, set it down, refilled the coffee without being asked. The man ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent time eating in conditions where you didn't know how long you'd get to do it. She recognized that too, though she couldn't have explained why. It was just a thing she'd learned to see. She gave him 10 minutes and then brought the check. She was pulling 2 more ketchup bottles from under the counter when she heard the stillness from his direction. Not a sound. The absence of one. She looked up. He was staring at the check, not reading it. It was a $9 check. There wasn't much to read. He was staring at it the way you stare at something when the numbers don't add up and you already knew they weren't going to, and you hoped the math might change on second look, and it didn't. He reached into the inside pocket of his cut, brought out a worn leather wallet, opened it. She could see, even from where she stood, that there was nothing in it. The man sat with the empty wallet in his hand and the full plate behind him, because he'd eaten already, and the check in front of him, and he didn't move. Something moved across his face that she had trouble naming. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly. It was something older and more private than embarrassment. It was the face a person makes when a thing they feared might happen has happened, and the fear was correct, and now they have to decide what to do with that. The 2 girls had gone quiet again. She could feel them watching. Rowan was deciding how to handle this. She had a discretionary 10 in her apron pocket. She could just, "Don't yell at my mom." The voice was small and absolutely certain. Rowan turned. Sadie was standing at the end of the counter. She was 7 years old and she was in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars on a dark blue background. And she had her red sneakers on, which meant she had put them on herself in the dark of the back office, where Rowan had put her to sleep 3 hours ago on the old folding cot that lived back there on the nights Carmen was out. And there was no one to watch her. And the sitter had canceled, and the backup sitter was her own sick mother, and the whole net of contingencies had collapsed as it sometimes did, leaving Rowan with no option but to bring her daughter to work and put her in the back and hope she slept through. She had not slept through. In her hand was a small tin, the kind that had once held mints or hard candies. She'd had it for months. Rowan knew what was in it. She'd watched Sadie count the contents and recount them with the serious financial attention of someone who had plans. $8. Crumpled and folded the way small money accumulates. $1 here, 2 there, birthday cash from Grandma, coins pressed into palms at church socials that Rowan's mother still attended. $8 that were going to a toy horse from the display by the register at the hardware store, because Sadie had seen it 3 months ago and had been saving for it since, and they had gone to look at it every single time Rowan drove them past, and Sadie had never once asked Rowan to just buy it. She put all 8 of it on the counter in front of the man with the empty wallet. "That's for his food," she said. She looked at Rowan. "Don't be mad. He can't pay." The man with the bruised jaw and the iron pennants cut and the swollen knuckles looked down at the pile of crumpled bills on the counter. He looked at the 7-year-old in star pajamas and red sneakers who had put them there. He looked at Rowan. His face did something that Rowan was not prepared for. It broke. Not dramatically. Not the way faces break in movies, with tears and visible anguish. It broke quietly, the way ice breaks in early spring, a fine network of cracks in something that had been held rigid for a very long time. His jaw tightened against it, His throat moved. He looked down again at those 8 crumpled dollars, and he sat very still. "Kid," he said. His voice was low, rougher than she'd expected even. "It's okay," Sadie said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Rowan came around the counter. "Sadie, go back to the—" "It's $8, Mom. I counted." Rowan looked at the man. The man looked at Sadie. The diner held its breath. He closed his wallet. He reached out very carefully, as though handling something fragile, and covered Sadie's hand with one of his large scarred ones. He didn't take the money back. He just placed his hand over hers for one moment, and then he withdrew it. "Thank you," he said. And the way he said it had nothing casual in it at all. He stood up from the stool, slowly, with the same careful management of his injured body, picked up his helmet from the counter where he'd set it, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle, and he didn't turn around when he said, "I'll be back to square it." The door closed. The neon OPE sign buzzed. Cold air swept the last of his warmth out of the room. Rowan stood with her hand on Sadie's shoulder and stared at the door for a moment longer than made sense. She had no idea how right he was. She put Sadie back on the cot. Sadie went without argument, which was unusual, and lay on her back with her eyes open, looking at the water-stained ceiling tiles while Rowan tucked the blanket around her. "Was he bad?" Sadie asked. "I don't know," Rowan said, because it was the honest answer. "He was sad," Sadie said. "People who are sad aren't bad. They're just sad." Rowan didn't respond to that. She turned off the light and pulled the door almost closed and stood in the hallway between the office and the kitchen for a moment, with her forehead against the wall and her eyes closed. The fluorescent light above her buzzed with a frequency that matched the tension at the base of her skull. She thought about the $8. She thought about what they represented. 3 months of Sadie's careful hoarding, the self-discipline of a 7-year-old who had understood instinctively that you didn't ask for things you couldn't afford, who had watched her mother manage shortfall after shortfall without complaint and had absorbed something from it that Rowan hadn't meant to teach her. She thought about the look on that man's face. Then she went back out to finish her shift. The parking lot was empty when she locked up at 2 in the morning. No motorcycle. No sign he had ever been there, except for the $9 plate on Pete's ticket board and the $8 in crumpled bills that she had put in the register, because what else do you do? She paid the dollar difference out of her apron and counted out her tips, and drove the 20 minutes home on roads that were empty and dark and beautiful in the way that Nevada is beautiful at 2 a.m. when no one else is watching it. The trailer was cold. She kept the heat lower than was comfortable because the propane bill came due on the 15th, and this was the 13th. She turned it up 2 degrees, a small act of winter defiance, and checked on Sadie, who had been transferred home in a half-asleep haze and was now fully unconscious in her own bed with the covers pulled up to her chin and her red sneakers still on one foot, the other having come off somewhere in transit. Rowan sat at the kitchen table for a while. The table was small and cheap and had a wobble she'd fixed twice with a folded piece of cardboard under the short leg, and it kept coming loose. She had 3 bills on it that she'd been rotating past their due dates: electric, phone, the credit card that charged 22% interest on the $900 she'd put on it when the car needed brake pads and the rent was already 2 weeks late. The total was not catastrophic. That was the thing about their situation that she had a hard time explaining to people who weren't in it. It wasn't catastrophic. It was just slightly more than manageable, and it was always slightly more than manageable. And the gap between slightly more and manageable was where she lived. She looked at the bills for a while and then turned them face down. Outside, the desert was silent. The trailer park held 10 units. Her neighbors were an older couple named the Galloways on one side who kept to themselves, and a young man named Trevor on the other side who worked nights at the distribution center and played guitar badly in the afternoons. And beyond him, a sequence of families and singles in various stages of their own slightly more than manageable situations. Nobody talked much. That was the rhythm of the place. You existed in parallel with people, sharing the same stretch of gravel and the same faulty water pressure, and you didn't intrude and they didn't intrude, and that was a kind of community. She went to bed at 3 and set her alarm for 6:30 because Sadie's school bus came at 7:50, and Rowan's next shift started at 9, and there were lunches to make and hair to braid and all the small machinery of a weekday morning to set in motion. She did not sleep well. She dreamed about the man's face, about the specific quality of the crack in it, about 8 crumpled dollars on a diner counter. She woke before the alarm, as she often did, at 5 a.m. with the sky still dark and the desert still and the propane heat doing its uneven work. She lay in the dark and thought about the eviction notice. It had been slid under the door 2 weeks ago by the park manager, a thin man named Hurley, who apologized every time he did it, which didn't make it better. She was 11 days past due. She had another 11 days before it became formal, before it became a thing with legal weight and timelines and consequences that cascaded. She had done the math. She had done it many times, in many different arrangements, and the math kept producing the same answer. Not enough. She got up, made coffee. The trailer smelled of last night's dinner, the cheap noodle dish she'd improvised from what was left in the cabinet, and cold air seeping through the seal around the front door that she'd stuffed with an old dish towel. She stood at the small window above the sink with her coffee and looked at the dark. That was when she heard it. Not one engine, not singular, not the approaching individual Harley of a man with a bruised jaw and an empty wallet. This was a sound that built. It started low, like distant weather, and it grew the way a storm grows, not from one source but from many, combining and amplifying and becoming something that was less a collection of separate sounds than a single, massive, organized thing. She counted without meaning to. 5, 8, 12, more than 12. The gravel of the trailer park entrance began to crunch, and she watched, coffee cup motionless in her hand, as the headlights swung in. One by one, and then in pairs. Big machines, all of them. American iron. The sound was enormous and unhurried, the way large things move when they're not concerned about being heard. They parked in a line along the edge of the road outside her unit. 12 bikes. 14. She lost count. The engines cut off in sequence, each one leaving a silence that was immediately filled by the next, until the last one went quiet and the night held a ringing absence. Every light in the trailer park had come on. She could see the Galloway's curtain move. She could see Trevor's porch light blink to life. Somewhere down the row, a dog that belonged to the family with 3 kids began to bark and then stopped abruptly. Rowan set down her coffee cup. She was already dressed. She slept in her clothes on bad nights, which had become most nights. And she had one clear thought, which was, Sadie is in the back room, and I need to stay between Sadie and the door. She did. She stood in front of the kitchen table with her arms at her sides and her heart doing something complicated in her chest, and she watched the door. The knock, when it came, was 3 times. Moderate, not aggressive. She opened it. He was there. Briggs? She didn't know his name yet, but she would. Standing at the foot of her 2-step plastic stoop with his helmet in the crook of his arm and his cut with its iron penance patch and his jaw still carrying that fading bruise. Behind him, the line of men and machines stretched along the road in the early morning dark. Some of them sat on their bikes. Some of them stood. All of them were still. I told you I'd square it, he said. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that, because the math of this situation, a convoy of large men on large motorcycles in her parking lot before 6 in the morning, didn't have a space in it for the kinds of things she might normally say. I know what this looks like, he said. Do you? She said. Something moved through his expression that might have been, if she'd been willing to call it that, a ghost of a smile. Yeah, I do. He paused. We're not here for anything. We don't want anything. That's not why we're here. Then why are you here? Because she paid a debt. He said it simply, like it was the most natural explanation in the world. In our world, that means something. Behind her, in the hallway, a small voice said, Mom? Sadie was standing in the bedroom doorway in her star pajamas, her hair tangled from sleep, one red sneaker still on her right foot. She looked past Rowan at the large man in the doorway, and then past him at the line of men and machines in the dark. She showed no fear. She showed what Rowan could only describe as recognition, as though this was surprising but not frightening, as though the universe had produced an answer in a form she hadn't expected but understood. You came back, Sadie said. We came back, the man said, and that was when Rowan noticed what 2 of them were carrying from the bike behind him. Brown paper bags, heavy with groceries. Another man behind him was carrying something in a handled case that looked like it might be a toolbox. Another had what looked like an envelope, the debt being squared. She did not know yet what was in the envelope. She would find out in a few minutes, and it would be the kind of number that would make her hand shake when she held it, and she would have to sit down. She did not know yet that the grocery bags contained not just food, but the specific calculus of having read a situation accurately. Formula and coffee and bread and eggs and vegetables, but also the good brand of peanut butter, the kind Sadie would eat, and a box of the animal crackers in the red string-handled box that children loved, which meant that someone had thought about what was needed rather than just what was large. She did not know any of it yet. She stood in her doorway in the cold November morning and looked at the man with the bruised jaw and the outlaw patch and the motorcycle convoy at her back, and she said the only thing that felt true. "I'm not going to invite you in." "That's fine," he said. "We'll leave it on the stoop." She looked at him for a long moment. She was reading him the way she read rooms. The micro-expressions, the weight distribution, the hands. He held her look without flinching and without aggression. His hands were loose at his sides. He was not performing anything. "What's your name?" she said. "Briggs." "Rowan," she said. She did not offer her hand. "I know," he said. "Your daughter said, last night." She thought about that. Sadie, lying on the folding cot in the back office of the diner, having apparently introduced herself to the large biker before or after putting her entire savings on his behalf. That was Sadie. That was the precise and baffling moral logic of her daughter. "Briggs," she said, because there was one thing she needed to say before any of this went further. "I don't know anything about your world or your code or what debts mean to you, but I need you to understand something." "Okay." "She's 7. The line of him shifted, not dramatically, a settling. "I know. Whatever this is, whatever you think you're honoring, she's 7 years old, and she doesn't understand what she did or what it means in your context. She saw a man who looked sad, and she gave him her horse money. That's all. That's the whole thing." He was quiet for a moment. The cold moved through the space between them. "I know that too," he said. "That's exactly why we're here." He reached into his cut and withdrew something. He held it out. It was small, carved from a pale wood. Birch, she would think later, though she didn't know much about wood. And it was rough in the places where the knife work had been, and smooth in the places where hands had worn it down. A horse, small enough to fit in a child's palm. The proportions were slightly off, the way handmade things are always slightly off. One ear was higher than the other. It was the most careful thing she had ever seen. He held it there in his large, scarred hand, and Sadie had come up behind Rowan's hip now and was looking at it with the focused attention of a child encountering something that has been made specifically for her, even though she didn't ask. "She gave up her horse money," Briggs said. "Seemed right." Sadie looked up at Rowan. Rowan looked at Briggs. The desert held its cold breath. "Can I take it?" Sadie asked, not grabbing, asking. "It's yours," he said. She reached past her mother's hip and took it from his hand with both of hers, and she turned it over and examined it with the seriousness of an artifact, and she said, "You made it." "Yeah." "When?" "Last night." Rowan thought about that. About a man going home after a diner at midnight, after whatever the bruised jaw and empty wallet were the aftermath of, and taking out a knife and a piece of wood and carving something small and careful for a child he'd met once. She could not fit it into any prior category she had for men like him. It kept sliding out of the frame. She took the envelope when they offered it next. She didn't open it on the stoop. She thanked him, a short, careful thank you that didn't commit to anything, and she watched them leave. They went in the same organized fashion they'd arrived, not rushing, not performing, just turning over their engines one by one and pulling back out onto the road and disappearing into the lightning Nevada morning until the sound faded to nothing and the trailer park was just a trailer park again, with its cracked gravel and its half-dead landscaping and its parallel rows of metal homes. Trevor was standing on his porch in a t-shirt and boxers, watching the road. She met his eyes. He said nothing, just went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table with the envelope. Sadie sat across from her with the wooden horse, turning it in her hands. $5,000. She counted it twice. Banded in small denominations, the way money gets when it's been collected rather than withdrawn, given by individual hands rather than a bank. She sat with it for a long time. Outside, the desert was fully light now. pale and cold and enormous, in the way Nevada is enormous when you look at it from a small place. The eviction notice was still in the drawer under the table where she'd put it 2 weeks ago. The bills were still stacked face down on the table. The propane was doing its uneven work. Sadie set the wooden horse on the table between them. It stood slightly crooked, one ear higher than the other, and it looked back at her with the blind attention of carved things. "He's one of the good ones," Sadie said. "Right?" Rowan looked at her daughter, at the horse, at the money. "I don't know yet," she said. But something had already shifted, something quiet and difficult to name, like ice in early spring. And the thing about early spring ice is that once it starts, you cannot put it back. She picked up the phone and called Hurley. He answered on the second ring, already apologetic. She stopped him before he could start. "I have the rent," she said. "I have all of it." A pause on his end. "Rowan, yeah, okay, that's good. I'll bring it by this afternoon." She hung up. She looked at the pile of bills on the table. She looked at the $5,000. She began to organize. This was how it started, not with gratitude, not with warmth, but with the cold, practical business of surviving, which was what she knew how to do. The warmth would come later. The fear would come first. The fear was already there, in fact, spreading its fingers through the practical optimism of the morning, asking the question she hadn't let herself ask yet. Who were these men? What did they actually want? What happened to people who accepted $5,000 from outlaw clubs and thought it was free? What did owing the Iron Pennant's MC actually look like 6 months from now, a year from now, when whatever balance she thought she'd been given turned out to have been a loan? The wooden horse looked back at her from the table. Sadie had named it already, she realized. She was whispering to it as she turned it in her hands, a quiet conversation she wasn't meant to hear. "Thunder," Sadie was telling the horse. "Your name is Thunder." The name hung in the cold morning air of the trailer, and somewhere at the edge of Rowan Vale's hearing, as though in answer, the very last of the Harley engines faded from the highway into the vast and waiting Nevada silence. And Rowan Vale, sitting at her kitchen table with $5,000 in her hands, and an eviction notice in her drawer, and a daughter who named carved horses after absent storms, felt the first real tremor of something she couldn't yet tell was gratitude, or danger, or both. She didn't know that in 11 days, she would see Briggs again in circumstances she hadn't planned for. She didn't know what she would learn about him then. She didn't know that the Iron Pennant's MC had a ledger that ran deeper than groceries and rent money, and that she and Sadie had been entered into it without ever signing anything. She didn't know any of it. But the morning was coming in through the window now, real and cold and sharp, and the bills were sorted into piles, and the money was real. And Thunder the carved horse was standing on the kitchen table like a small crooked sentry. And somewhere on Route 93, heading back toward whatever the Iron Pennant's MC called home, a large man with a healing jaw and scarred knuckles was riding through the Nevada morning with his face into the cold, and something was working in him. Some recalibration. Something that had been knocked loose the night before at a diner counter by 8 crumpled dollars and a child in star pajamas. That he would not have been able to name if you asked him, but that sat in his chest like the beginning of an answer to a question he'd stopped allowing himself to ask. Rowan folded the $5,000. She put it in the coffee tin above the refrigerator because that was where she kept emergency money, in the same place her mother had kept emergency money, in the same tin with the same faded rooster on the side, and she thought about the logic of that. How the things your mother did with money become the things you do with money. How poverty has a grammar that passes down. She made Sadie's lunch. She braided Sadie's hair. She sent Sadie to the bus stop with Thunder wrapped in a dish towel at the bottom of her backpack, because they had agreed she wouldn't bring it to school today, but the agreement had the texture of something temporary. Then Rowan sat alone in the trailer in the silence, left by her daughter's absence, and she drank the rest of her coffee, and she looked at her own hands. The calluses from the plates, the small scar on her left thumb from a broken glass 6 months ago, the bitten-down nails, the skin that was drier than it should be from washing her hands 40 times a shift. And she tried to decide what kind of story she was in. She didn't know yet. That was the problem with early spring ice. You couldn't tell which way it would break. The coffee tin sat above the refrigerator for 11 days without being touched. Rowan had made a rule about it. Not a spoken rule, not a rule she'd explained to Sadie, Just an internal law she'd set the morning after the Iron Pennant's MC had filled her parking lot with iron and sound and brown grocery bags. The money was for survival, not comfort, not breathing room, not the small luxuries that poverty brains sometimes mistook for necessities when cash was suddenly present. The money was for the specific identified debts: rent, electric, phone, the credit card. And those debts only, paid in that order, and whatever remained after would sit in the tin and not be thought about until it needed to be thought about. She paid Hurley the back rent the afternoon of the first day. He took it with both hands, which she hadn't expected, and said, "I'm glad, Rowan. I mean it." She believed him and didn't know what to do with that, so she nodded and left. She paid the electric on day 2, online, through the utility company's website, on her phone in the parking lot of the diner before her shift started. She watched the balance go from past due in red letters to current in green, and sat with that for a moment. Green, current, not behind, the small electronic mercy of a color change. The phone bill on day 4. The credit card minimum on day 6. She paid more than the minimum, the first time she had done that in 14 months, and the interest charge dropped by an amount that was small in absolute terms and enormous in what it meant about the direction of things. By day 11, she had $840 left in the tin. $840 was not wealth. She knew that. It was not even security, not really. Not in a place where one bad thing, a transmission, a medical bill, a broken water heater, could eat it in a single afternoon. But it was a number that looked different from 0. It had a different weight when she held it in her mind. 0 had a particular gravitational quality, a way of pulling everything toward it. 840 resisted that pull in a way she hadn't felt in longer than she wanted to admit. She was thinking about this, standing at the kitchen sink, washing the breakfast dishes, watching the pale December light come off the desert, when she heard the bike. Just one, this time. She recognized the sound now. She would not have said that 11 days ago, would not have believed she could distinguish one engine from another in a field of motorcycle noise. But she had apparently learned something without trying to, the way the body learns things it isn't asked to, the specific idol of it. The way it pulled into the parking lot gravel rather than the road in front of the trailer. She dried her hands. She waited. He knocked the same way. 3 times. Moderate. She opened the door. Briggs stood on the stoop in a jacket rather than the cut today. A heavy canvas work jacket, the kind with the blanket lining, dark olive. But the Iron Pennant's patch was visible on the back of the cut folded over his forearm. His jaw had healed. The bruise was gone, leaving just the slight asymmetry of a face that had been rearranged more than once over its lifetime. He looked clearer than he had the night at the diner, like the weather had changed in him. "I'm not here for anything," he said, before she could ask. It was the second time he'd said that exact sentence to her, and she was beginning to understand that he knew how he landed, knew what the cut and the size and the history communicated before a single word came out. "Then why are you here?" she said. Same question. Different morning. "Wanted to see how you were doing." She looked at him. "That's it," he said. "That's the whole reason." The cold came in around him through the open door. She had the heat at a comfortable temperature this morning. A small change she'd made the day after paying the electric, 1 degree warmer than she'd allowed herself all fall. And the contrast was sharp. "I'm doing fine," she said. "Good." A pause. The desert did its thing in the background. A raven somewhere, calling once and going silent. "Sadie at school?" he asked. The question landed differently than it should have. Not threatening. She looked at him hard for a fraction of a second and found nothing in his face that matched the word threatening. It landed differently because it was domestic. Because it was the question a person asked when they had developed some investment in the answer. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said again. She looked at him for a long moment. He waited. He was, she had noticed, a man who was comfortable with waiting, with silence. Most people filled silence because it made them anxious. Briggs seemed to use it the way other men used breath, just a thing that happened between the things that mattered. "You want coffee," she said. Not a question. An evaluation. "Only if it's not a problem." "It's a problem," she said. "Come in anyway." She turned away from the door and went to the kitchen. He came in. He was too large for the trailer the way certain objects are too large for certain spaces. Not uncomfortably so, not comically, but in a way that reorganized the visual geometry of the room. He stood just inside the door and looked around with the careful non-intrusiveness of someone who understood that a person's home was an extension of themselves and should be read, not assessed. She heard him move. Not close. He stayed near the door. "Sit down," she said. "You're making me nervous standing there." He sat at the kitchen table. He put his jacket on the back of the chair. Under it he wore a dark green Henley with the sleeves pushed up, and she could see the tattoos on his forearms, a complicated geography of ink that she didn't look at long enough to interpret. She poured 2 mugs and brought them to the table and sat across from him. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Same gesture as at the diner counter. Like warmth was something he reached for automatically before he'd thought about it. "The rent," she said. "It's paid." "Good." "The electric, the phone, the card." "Good." "I want to know what you expect from that," she said. He looked at her. "Nothing. That's not how money works." "It is in this case." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. He turned the mug a half rotation on the table. "Because your daughter gave a stranger her horse money. Because she didn't do it to get anything back. She did it because she saw a person who needed something and she had something to give." He paused. "The chapter took a vote. This is how we respond to that. You took a vote on my family. We took a vote on a debt. Your family is how the debt exists." She processed this. "And the vote was unanimous." The vote was unanimous. She looked at her coffee. "Who are these men?" "The chapter." He considered the question. "You want the long answer or the short one?" "I want the true one." Something moved in his face. Not the breaking thing from the diner, something more controlled than that. A door opening just enough to look through. 14 men, mostly veterans. Some of them never came all the way back from where the military sent them. Some of them got out and found that nothing on the outside fit anymore. The club it's a structure. It's a set of rules and obligations that make sense when other things stopped making sense. A set of rules like repaying a 7-year-old's generosity with $5,000. A set of rules like you take care of your debts, and you protect people who acted with honor, and you don't leave things uneven. She heard the word protect. She let it sit. And when does the protection become something else? He met her eyes. It doesn't. You understand why I can't just take that on faith. Yeah, he said. I understand exactly why. They drank their coffee. The trailer creaked in the wind. Outside, a truck went past on the county road, rattling the windows slightly in their frames. She had been meaning to re-weather strip those frames since September. "What happened to your jaw?" she said. "The night at the diner." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Chapter business," he said finally. "Nothing that touches you." "You came into my diner." "I did." He nodded. "That part wasn't planned." "Were you in danger that night?" "I was past the danger part," he said. The danger part had already happened. She wanted to ask more. She stopped herself, not because she didn't want to know, but because she recognized the shape of the thing you don't push on because it's holding weight you can't see, and if you push wrong, the whole structure comes down and you're standing in the rubble of someone else's careful containment. She had her own weight like that. She knew what it looked like from the outside. "I'm not going to keep asking you to check on us," she said. "I know. If you keep coming by, my neighbors will talk. My daughter will get attached. I can't afford either of those things." He nodded slowly. "I hear you. But," he looked up, "but I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. You helped us. I can acknowledge that without becoming," she searched for the word, "dependent on it." "That's all we want," he said, "for you to be okay. That's the whole of it." She believed him. She didn't entirely trust herself for believing him, but she believed him. He finished his coffee. He put on his jacket. At the door he stopped, not turning, the same way he'd stopped at the diner door. And she realized this was a thing he did, a way of saying something without the full exposure of facing you when he said it. "The wooden horse," he said. "Sadie named it?" "Thunder." A short pause. "Good name." He left. The engine started. It pulled out of the gravel and onto the county road and faded. Rowan sat at the kitchen table with two empty mugs and the winter light coming through the window and the coffee tin above the refrigerator, and the whole complex arithmetic of the last 11 days sorted into something that felt, if not safe, at least navigable. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't know it for 3 more weeks. The weeks moved. December deepened. The desert cold became a serious thing. Not the dramatic cold of mountain states, but the dry, penetrating cold of high desert in winter. The kind that came in through walls and floors and sat in your bones by morning. Rowan's car needed an oil change she'd been putting off, and she got it done now. And the mechanic who did it, a man named Roy at the station 4 miles up 93, looked under the hood with the expression of someone delivering news and told her the serpentine belt was cracked and would need to go before spring or she'd be stranded, and the quote he gave her for that was $210. And she said she'd schedule it for January when she'd rebuilt some of the tin. Roy nodded. He had the manner of a man who had heard many sentences about rebuilding tins. Sadie's school sent home a permission slip for a winter overnight field trip. 2 days at a state park, educational programming, a fee of $45 per student. Last year, Rowan had written the check for 25 of it, sent a note explaining the rest, and the school had absorbed the difference without comment through some fund or another. This year she wrote the full check. It was a small thing. It was not small. She worked her shifts. She covered for Carmen twice when Carmen's kid was sick. She picked up an extra Saturday shift from a girl named Bex who was going home to Reno for a birthday. The money moved in directions it hadn't moved in a long time, not just outward, toward debts, but sideways, toward the future. She had started thinking about the future again, which she recognized as a form of luxury she'd been unable to afford. She did not see Briggs again. She thought about him sometimes, in the odd moments, doing dishes, driving the dark highway home, lying awake at 5 a.m. with the pre-dawn quiet in the trailer. Not romantically, or not only romantically, which was itself a complicated thing to sit with. She thought about what he'd said. Veterans who never fully came back. A structure that made sense when other things stopped. The careful way he'd held the carved horse out to Sadie, as though it might break, or as though he was the fragile one in that transaction. She thought about men who carried weight nobody talked about. She had grown up with one. Her father, Dennis Vale, had been a large, quiet man who worked in the county water department for 30 years, and came home every evening and sat in the same chair and said very little, and sometimes, in the middle of ordinary silences, had an expression that she could see, even as a child, was him being somewhere else entirely. Not depressed, not difficult, just somewhere else. Her mother had said once, in the direct prairie manner she had, "Your daddy left pieces of himself in places he can't go back to get." Rowan had been 12 and hadn't fully understood it. She thought she understood it better now. She was thinking about none of this and all of it simultaneously on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after Briggs' visit to the trailer when she stopped at the gas station on the way home from her shift. It was the one on the edge of town. She usually went to the station closer to the diner, but she'd missed the turn while thinking about the serpentine belt. And she was low, and this one was fine, just slightly more expensive. She pulled up to a pump. She got out in the cold, swiped her card, watching the balance in her head the way she always did, started the pump, and turned to go inside for the cup of bad coffee that was her standard road reward. She stopped. Briggs was at the next pump over. He was in the canvas jacket again, the cut visible on his forearm where he'd draped it, and he wasn't looking at her. He was reading the display on the pump with his arms crossed in the cold, and beside him, leaning against the body of his motorcycle in the way of someone comfortable with motorcycles, was a girl. 6 years old, maybe 7. She had dark hair and 2 braids, and she was wearing a jacket 2 sizes too large for her, and she was watching the numbers on the pump display with complete focus, apparently having decided this was the most interesting thing currently happening in Nevada. Rowan would have left. She had not been going to say hello. They had established a rhythm. His one visit to the trailer, the coffee, the ending, and it had felt like a closing of the loop rather than the beginning of one. She had been comfortable with that. She needed to be comfortable with that. But the girl looked up and saw her, and smiled with the indiscriminate warmth of a child who had not yet learned to assess strangers before distributing it. Briggs looked over. For a moment they just looked at each other across the pump island. "Rowan," he said. "Briggs." The girl had gone back to watching the numbers. "Yours?" Rowan asked with a small gesture toward her. Something happened in his face that was too complex to be just yes. My niece, he said. Danny. She visiting? A pause. She's with me now. The pause held weight that she didn't pull on. Her mom, my sister, had some trouble. Danny's staying at the clubhouse for a bit. Rowan looked at the small girl in the oversized jacket watching the fuel display. She thought about what a bit might mean in the context of some trouble in a 6-year-old at a motorcycle club's premises. Is that... she started. It's fine, he said. She's fine. The guys are good with her. She thought about 14 men who were mostly veterans and mostly living by a code, and probably knew a great deal about certain kinds of hard situations, and very little about the particular needs of a 6-year-old child. She thought about what fine looked like in that context. Does anyone there know what she needs? The routine stuff. What kids need day to day. He looked at her directly. We're figuring it out. She recognized this sentence. She had said this sentence many times, in many kitchens, and it always meant the same thing. We're managing, but we're out of our depth, and we won't say that. She almost let it go. She was very nearly in the car already, in her mind, driving home, finishing the afternoon. Then Danny looked up from the pump display and said, with complete confidence directly to Rowan, "Your hair is really long." "It is," Rowan said. "Mine's in braids," Danny said. "He did them." She gestured at Briggs with the absolute casual authority of a child reporting a fact. Rowan looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at the middle distance with the particular expression of a man hoping to not be looked at. The braids were, she could see now, not terrible. A little tight, a little uneven, made by large scarred hands that knew how to carve horses and apparently had learned enough about braids to produce something functional, if not elegant. She thought about those hands doing that work, and the patience that would have required, and something in her chest moved without her permission. He did a good job, she said. Danny considered this. He pulled it the first time. Once, Briggs said, to the middle distance. He said sorry, Danny said. This, apparently, had resolved the matter. Rowan's pump clicked off. She put the nozzle back. She should get in the car. She took out one of the diner receipts from her jacket pocket. She always had them. They were the paper of her life. And borrowed a pen from inside the gas station and wrote her number on the back and gave it to Briggs. If you need anything, she said, for her, advice or, I don't know, anything practical. He took the receipt and looked at it. I'm not giving that to you for any other reason, she said. I know, he said, just for if she needs girl stuff, kid stuff, things you don't know. I know, he said again. And something in the way he said it, not relieved, not grateful, but settled like something had landed correctly in a calculation, made her look at him for a moment longer before she got in the car. Danny waved at her as she drove out of the gas station. She drove home with the heater on and the radio off and thought about the braids, about the apology, about 14 veterans figuring out what a 6-year-old needed day to day. She thought, I am getting involved in this. I told myself I wouldn't get involved in this. She thought, Sadie was right. People who are sad aren't bad. They're just sad. She thought, this is how it starts. She was right about that last one. She just had the direction wrong. She was thinking about herself, about her own involvement, her own caution, the risk of allowing these men into the orbit of her life and her daughter's life. She was not yet thinking about what existed in the negative space of this situation. The thing that wasn't Briggs and wasn't the chapter and wasn't the debt. The thing that had put the bruise on his jaw to begin with. She found out about it on a Thursday. Carmen told her. Carmen, who talked to everyone in the county as a matter of personal philosophy, who had a brother-in-law in law enforcement, and a cousin who worked dispatch, and an aunt who had been serving breakfast to the sheriff's deputies at the Sunrise Diner for 22 years. Carmen, who knew everything that moved through the valley's information streams, who was sleeping with whom, which business was in trouble, what happened last weekend on Route 93, and who shared it with the impersonal generosity of someone who didn't distinguish between news and gossip, because she genuinely did not see a difference. You know who your biker is, Carmen said during a slow stretch between the lunch rush and the dinner setup, refilling the sugar caddies. He's not my biker, Rowan said. The Iron Pennants guy. Briggs. What about him? Carmen looked at her with the expression of someone about to say something they're enjoying having to say. He used to be a cop, Rowan stopped wiping the counter. 13 years, Carmen said. Washoe County, made detective. Then something happened. My brother-in-law wasn't specific, but the word was internal affairs, and a case that went sideways, and he took his badge and turned it in before they could take it from him. Rowan thought about this. When? 4 years ago. Maybe 5. Carmen shrugged. Then he turns up with the iron penance. My brother-in-law says the department has mixed feelings about him now. Some of them think he went dirty. Some of them think he found out something he wasn't supposed to, and this is what happened to him after. Which does your brother-in-law think? Carmen looked at the sugar caddy. He thinks Briggs is one of those guys who couldn't live with something he saw, and that the club was the only place that would take a man like that without asking him to explain himself. Rowan went back to wiping the counter. She wiped it very carefully, attending to the task with more focus than it required. Rowan, Carmen said, I heard you. He's not dangerous to you. I don't think that. A pause. But he's got a whole situation. That's what I'm saying. Everyone has a whole situation, Rowan said. Some situations are bigger than others. She thought about this on and off for the rest of the shift. About a man who had spent 13 years learning how systems worked and then encountered the thing those systems did when they wanted to protect themselves. About what it did to your sense of structure when the structure you devoted yourself to revealed that it was primarily loyal to itself. About a set of rules that make sense when other things stopped making sense. She thought about the bruised jaw and the empty wallet, about chapter business, nothing that touches you, about the night at the diner and whatever had happened before it. She called him that night. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he was awake at 11:30, which told her something about his sleep. You were a cop, she said. Silence. Not long. Yeah. You were going to tell me this. Was going to give it more time. Why? A longer pause. She heard something in the background, the ambient sound of the clubhouse, she assumed. Low voices, the particular acoustic of a large room. Because people hear cop and decide everything, he said. Or they hear ex-cop and the club, and they hear the worst version of both. What's the real version? Complicated, he said. Same as everything. What happened? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was deciding whether to answer or how much of the answer to give. I was working a case, trafficking, not drugs, people. He paused. I found something that connected people in the department to it. Not everyone. 2 officers. Maybe 3. I went to the right people, and the right people had reasons to not want to hear it. She absorbed this. So they came after you. They made it very clear that what I'd found could be explained in a lot of ways, and that the most convenient explanation would involve me. Another pause. I had a choice. Be the story or leave. You left. I left. And the people who were connected to the trafficking case. Still there? He said. Couple of them retired. One of them got a commendation. She was quiet. The Iron Pennants found me about a month after I quit, he said. Or I found them. It was mutual. They had a situation that needed someone who knew how investigations worked. I had a lot of time and no functional reason to not drink myself to death. He said this with the flatness of a man reporting a past weather event. It worked out. The night at the diner, she said. The bruised jaw. There's a man named Carver, not a cop, connected to the same network I found the first time. He's been operating in this county for 2 years. We've been watching it. The night at the diner was me being less careful than I should have been about where I went alone. He hit you. His associates did. A beat. I came out better than they did. She looked at the wall of her trailer, at the window with the bad seal and the dish towel draft stopper. And this man, Carver, has nothing to do with you, Briggs said immediately. That part is separate. Your family is separate. Is it? Yes. No hesitation. I would not have let any of this near you if there was any connection. The debt is a separate thing. You and Sadie are a separate thing. She believed him. She believed him. And she also knew that the world did not honor the separateness of things simply because someone needed them to be separate. She knew that gravity didn't care about your careful organizational systems. She knew that the thing Carver represented, a trafficking network, the institutional corruption that had protected it, the man who had paid for exposing it with 13 years of his life, was a live thing, Not historical, not resolved. Briggs, she said. Yeah. Is Danny safe? A pause that went 2 beats longer than it should have. Yes. She heard the 1 beat of hesitation in it. She let it sit. Are you sure? She said. There's nothing specific, he said carefully. There's nothing pointing at her or the club. What I'm doing with Carver is... It's monitored. It's controlled. No one outside the chapter knows what we know. She thought about the word specific, about how it carefully excluded the non-specific, about what a man like Briggs, with his 13 years of investigative training, would consider specific. Okay, she said. Rowan, I heard you. I'll tell you if that changes. Okay, she said again. She hung up and sat in the dark of the trailer with the heater running and the coffee tin above the refrigerator, and Sadie asleep in her room, and Thunder the carved horse on the desk next to Sadie's homework, where it lived now, permanent and crooked-eared, and she sat with the shape of the thing she had just learned. A cop who found corruption and was destroyed for it. A trafficking network still running. A man named Carver. A chapter of veterans building something rough and functional out of their broken pieces. A 6-year-old girl in an oversized jacket watching fuel pump numbers. She was not afraid. That was the strange part. She had expected to be afraid. And she sat with the inventory of her emotional state and found something other than fear. Something alert and watchful and slightly cold, the way the desert was cold, the way clarity was sometimes cold. She thought, I should not call him again. She thought, I'm going to call him again. She was right about both. 3 days later, on a Sunday, Carmen's aunt from the Sunrise Diner called the diner where Rowan worked because Carmen's aunt knew everybody, and the information networks of the county were comprehensive and informal. And what she passed on went from Carmen's aunt to Carmen to Rowan in the span of 40 minutes. A deputy named Kellner, not one of the ones Briggs had named, a different one, younger, not known for corruption but known for being close to the people who were, had pulled over a man from the Iron Penance chapter on a county road outside town. Not Briggs. A man named Tig, who was large and quiet and had served 8 years Army and had been with the chapter for 3. Kellner had held him for 2 hours on a stop that had no clear probable cause, run every check available, impounded the bike on a registration technicality that was borderline at best. This alone would have been just a thing that happened. The kind of harassment that was routine at the intersection of law enforcement and outlaw clubs. What made it not just a thing was the question Kellner asked him, according to Tig, repeatedly and in various forms during those 2 hours. Where is Briggs Kane keeping the girl? Carmen relayed this to Rowan in the parking lot of the diner. In the 10 minutes between Rowan's lunch shift ending and Carmen's dinner shift starting, in a voice that was low and slightly different from Carmen's usual register, stripped of the gossip pleasure, just the information delivered clean. Rowan stood in the parking lot in the cold and held her keys. He asked about the girl specifically, she said. Specifically, Carmen said. Not about the chapter. Not about Briggs. The girl. He said her name. He said the girl. My aunt said Tig didn't react, didn't confirm, didn't give him anything, but the question got asked. Rowan stood very still. Rowan, Carmen said, I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you what I heard. I know, Rowan said. I know, thank you. She got in the car. She sat in the parking lot with the engine running and the heater going and her keys in the ignition, and she thought about Danny in the oversized jacket watching the fuel pump numbers, about some trouble and her mom and a 6-year-old who was staying with the club for a bit, about a trafficking network that was still running, about a question asked by a deputy who was close to the wrong people. Where's Briggs Kane keeping the girl? Not, is Briggs Kane harboring a minor? Not, what is Briggs Kane's relationship to this child? Not anything that sounded like procedure or welfare or law. Keeping. The word had a specific gravity. The word implied that the girl was something to be located, something that someone else had an interest in finding, and the person asking about finding her was connected, however tangentially, however plausibly deniably, to the same network that had destroyed a detective's career for getting too close. She called Briggs. He picked up on the first ring this time. I know, he said, before she could speak. You know. Tig called me 40 minutes ago. Then you know what I'm going to ask. A pause. She heard him breathing, heard the ambient sound of the clubhouse behind him, but quieter than last time. Fewer voices, or voices held lower. "Ask it anyway," he said. "Is Danny connected to Carver's network? Not theoretically, specifically." The pause was longer than any pause she had heard from him. "Briggs? Her mother," he said. "My sister. The trouble she was in, it wasn't just legal trouble. She got involved with people. She didn't know what they were. And then she did know, and she couldn't get out clean." He stopped. "Danny's father is one of Carver's men." The parking lot of the diner sat very still around Rowan. "Carver's man," she said. "He doesn't know about Danny, didn't know she existed. My sister kept it from him for 4 years. Something changed. He found out. That's why Lisa, my sister, that's why she got Danny to me. She's trying to get herself free of it. But Danny is leverage," Rowan said. "If they find her, yes." She closed her eyes. She opened them. The parking lot was the same. The desert beyond the lot was the same. The cold air against the windshield was the same. "You have 14 men in a clubhouse," she said. "You have protocols for this kind of thing." "We do." "Then you don't need—" She stopped. "No," he said. "I don't." "Then why did you tell me any of this?" A silence. A long one. The longest one she had had with him. She waited it out the way he had taught her to without knowing he was teaching her, by staying in it, not filling it, letting it do what it needed to do. "Because you asked," he said finally. "Because you asked me if Danny was safe, and I didn't give you a clean answer, and you deserve clean answers." He paused. "And because the deputy who questioned Tig, his name is Kellner. He was parked outside the diner 2 nights ago, your diner, for 40 minutes before your shift ended." She didn't breathe. "He wasn't there for Danny," Briggs said. "Danny was already at a secondary location. She's been moved. She's covered. He wasn't there for her." Another pause. "He was watching you. The heater ran. The engine ran. The desert sat at the edges of everything, indifferent and vast and bright in the afternoon light. And Rowan Vale sat in the parking lot of the diner where she had worked for 7 years and understood, with the specific clarity of someone who had been naive about exactly one thing for exactly long enough, that whatever she had thought this was, it was not that anymore. She thought about Sadie on the school bus, 40 minutes from now, arriving at the corner where Rowan always picked her up. She thought about the trailer and the coffee tin and the wooden horse on the desk. She thought about 8 crumpled dollars on a diner counter and the chain of consequence that had moved outward from that moment like water from a stone, silent and invisible and already much further than she'd been watching. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. The silence on his end this time was different from all the other silences. It was the silence of a man who had been waiting for exactly this question and hating himself for waiting for it and knowing it was coming anyway. "Pick up Sadie," he said. "Go straight home. Don't stop anywhere. I'll be at your place in an hour." The call ended. Rowan sat with the dead phone in her hand and the heater running and the parking lot around her going about its ordinary business. A woman loading groceries into a minivan, a teenager on a bicycle cutting through the far end, a crow working at something on the asphalt near the dumpster. And none of it knew what had just happened inside this car, inside this conversation, inside the quiet reorganization of everything she had believed about her situation. She put the car in drive. She drove to Sadie's school. She drove the way she drove when she was holding something. Both hands on the wheel, speed exactly at the limit, eyes tracking every intersection with the focused attention of someone who had decided that the world required watching. The afternoon light was flat and pale, the kind of Nevada winter light that gave everything equal weight and cast no shadows. She passed the gas station where she had seen Briggs and Danny. She passed the county road where Kellner would have pulled over Tig. She drove, and she did not let herself think about what was at the end of this drive, about what came after pick up Sadie, go straight home, don't stop. She did not think about any of it because if she started, she would not be able to drive correctly, and she needed to drive correctly. Sadie was at the corner. She was always at the corner. She stood with her backpack and her jacket unzipped, even in the cold, the way children stood who ran warm, talking to a friend from the bus. She looked up when she saw the car and said something to the friend and ran the last 20 feet with the complete physical commitment of a child who ran everywhere. She got in, slammed the door. The backpack went in the footwell. "You're early," she said. A little, Rowan said. Is something wrong? The perceptiveness of children. It lived in the peripheral vision. They caught what you were looking at, the direct thing too hard to see. No, Rowan said. I just finished early. Sadie studied her for 3 seconds with the seriousness of someone conducting an evaluation and then apparently accepted it, turning to look out the window. We did fractions today, she said. They're not that hard. Good. Mrs. Elliott said most people think they're hard, but they're really just division with extra steps. Mrs. Elliott's right. She drove home. She took no detours. She watched the rear view the way she had never watched it before. Not frantically, not visibly, just with a new quality of attention, a layer of awareness that ran underneath the ordinary driving like a second frequency. She saw 2 vehicles behind her for more than a mile each. Both turned off before the county road. Neither was a patrol car. She pulled into the trailer park. She parked. She looked at the rear view one more time and saw nothing but the empty gravel road. Mom, Sadie said. Yeah. You're doing the face. What face? The one where you're thinking about money. Rowan looked at her daughter. I'm not thinking about money. The one where you're thinking about something you don't want to tell me. She put the car in park. She turned off the engine. The desert cold began to press against the windows immediately, the way it waited for the heat to stop. We're going to have company tonight, she said. Briggs is coming by. Sadie's face arranged itself into something interested. And Danny? Maybe. She hadn't asked. Possibly. I'll clean my room, Sadie said, with the casual authority of someone for whom this was the obvious response, and got out of the car. Rowan sat in the cooling car for 30 seconds after the door slammed. She looked at the trailer, at the ordinary window with the dish towel draft stopper, at the neighbor's porch light coming on automatically as the afternoon darkened, at the gravel road. Then she got out. He arrived 45 minutes later. Alone. No Danny. He had a different bike this time, she noticed, or she noticed it now for the first time. Older, darker, less conspicuous than she might have expected. He parked it alongside the trailer rather than in the open lot, behind the propane tank where it couldn't be seen from the road. She noticed him do this. He didn't comment on it. Inside, he didn't sit. He stood near the kitchen table with his jacket on and his hands at his sides, and he took in the layout of the space with the systematic, unhurried attention of someone mapping it. Danny, Rowan said. She's at a chapter member's house, off the map. She's good. He paused. Her father's name is Reyes, Danny Reyes. He's been with Carver's network for 6 years. When he found out about Danny, he told Carver. He stopped. Carver has an operation. On the surface, it's transport, logistics, county contracts. Underneath that, he moves people. Has for a decade. They're a commodity in that world. A 6-year-old girl that his guy fathered and didn't know about and can now be used to control that guy. Stop, Rowan said. He stopped. She had her back to him at the sink. She stood there for a moment with her hands on the edge of the counter. Sadie was in her room. She could hear the particular sound of Sadie doing homework, the scrape of pencil, the occasional thump of an eraser, and she let herself calibrate to that sound for a moment before she turned around. Does Carver know Danny is with you? She said. He knows she's with the chapter. The specific location? No, not yet. Kellner's working on that. Kellner's one piece. Carver has more pieces. He said this without inflection, as a fact. He's been careful for a decade. He doesn't move until he has what he needs. How much time? Days? Maybe less. She looked at him. At the specific quality of his stillness. The stillness of someone who had already done the math and was waiting for her to do it too. What are you going to do? We have a contact. Federal, not local, federal. Someone I've been building since I left the department. She's been tracking Carver independently. We get her what we have, the documentation, the surveillance, what Tig heard from Kellner. It gives her grounds to move on the network. Not a county case. Federal. How long does that take? The contact moves fast when she has something solid. We have something solid. A pause. 2 days. Maybe 3. And in 2 or 3 days, the chapter holds the line. He said it simply, not dramatically. Like holding the line was a thing you said when you meant it, not when you wanted it to sound like something. She thought about 14 men, about veterans with broken pieces and a code that made sense when other things didn't, about Tig, held on a county road for 2 hours with one repeated question, about a trafficking network that had survived 10 years and a detective and a commendation. She thought about Sadie in the next room doing fractions. Why was Kellner watching the diner? She said. Briggs didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. Briggs? We think Carver is being careful about the chapter, he said. After what happened with Tig, he knows we're watching him. Coming directly at the clubhouse it has costs he doesn't want to pay. 14 men who know how this works on their own ground with their own protocols. He paused. So he looks for softer access points. People connected to us who don't have those protocols. She heard it before he finished saying it. Me. You received money from the chapter. You've been seen with me twice in public. In Carver's world, that makes you adjacent. Adjacent to what? To leverage. The word sat in the trailer kitchen between them. The heater ran. From Sadie's room, the sound of a pencil on paper. Rowan stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the man who had come into her diner with a bruised jaw and an empty wallet and started a chain of events that had arrived, after 2 months, at this specific and terrible point. My daughter, she said. Is not on his radar, Briggs said. You are adjacent. She is my daughter, Rowan said. If I'm adjacent, she is adjacent. That's how this works. You know how this works? He held her look. He didn't deny it. She put both hands flat on the kitchen table. She looked at the surface of it, the wobble she'd fixed twice, the ring from her coffee mug, the small scar in the laminate from when Sadie had pressed too hard with a ballpoint pen doing homework 6 months ago. The archaeology of their ordinary life, right there in the table's surface. You brought this near us, she said. Yes. No pause. No qualification. And you didn't tell me. I told you as soon as there was something specific. He said this carefully, not defensively. Before Kellner and the diner, there was nothing pointing here. I would not have... But now there is something pointing here. Yes. She looked at him. You need to leave. Tonight. Your bike, your connection to us, the chapter, all of it. You need to be gone from this address so that when Kellner or whoever he sends drives past here, they see nothing. I agree, he said. And then I need to know that Sadie and I are not, that we are off whatever list we're on. You were never on a list. He said it with a force she hadn't heard from him before. You were observed. That's different. Carver is careful. He surveys before he moves. You were surveilled, which means you haven't been moved on yet, which means there's still time to make this clean. How do you make this clean for us? We cut the connection, visibly. I don't come here. No chapter presence near the diner or this address. Nothing that gives Carver a reason to think you have value to him. He paused. And we move on him fast enough that the calculation becomes irrelevant. She thought about this, about the logic of it, about whether the logic held. And if the contact takes longer than 3 days, she said, then we adjust. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. She stood at the kitchen table in her trailer in the Nevada desert, and she looked at the man who had been a detective and was now an outlaw, and who had carved a horse in the middle of the night for a child he'd met once, and who was standing in her kitchen because a debt of $8 had grown into something neither of them had the language for. And she made a decision. Go, she said. Do what you need to do. And if it stops being 3 days, if it gets longer, you call me. Immediately, not after. Immediately. Okay. I mean it, Briggs. I know you do. He left the way he'd come. She heard the bike start from behind the propane tank, quieter than usual, and pull out away from the road rather than toward it, taking the back route through the park's secondary exit. She watched from the dark window. Then she went and sat on the edge of Sadie's bed and watched her daughter finish the last of the fraction problems, and she thought about leverage and adjacent and the specific distance between surveillance and action, and she thought about how $8 had moved through the world. She did not sleep well. She had stopped sleeping well weeks ago and had been managing it by treating 5 a.m. as a reasonable start rather than an early one. But tonight was different. Tonight was the kind of not sleeping that was not passive, not the ordinary background hum of financial anxiety, but active, pointed, the brain running through specific scenarios with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had trained themselves to be prepared. She ran through them all and came to the same conclusion each time. She was dependent on Briggs's timeline, on the federal contact, on 14 men holding a line she couldn't see or participate in, and dependency, in her experience, was where things broke. The call came at 3:47 in the morning, not Briggs. A number she didn't know. She answered it on the first ring because she had been lying in the dark waiting for something, and this was something. The voice was a woman's, controlled, low, with the specific neutral precision of someone trained to deliver information in compressed form. Ms. Vale, my name is Agent Castillo. I'm the federal contact Briggs Kane has been working with. I need you to listen carefully. I'm listening, Rowan said. 2 hours ago, our surveillance on Kellner picked up a communication. He reported your address to an intermediary connected to Carver's network. We believe Carver is aware of your location and your connection to Kane. Rowan sat up in bed, the dark of the trailer, the heater, Sadie's door, slightly open, the child breath silence behind it. How long? Rowan said. We don't know his timeline. That's why I'm calling now. A pause. I have the authority to move on Carver within the next 18 hours. We've been building this case for 14 months. What Kane gave us, combined with what we already have, is enough. But I need something from you. What? Kellner. He's the local connection, the piece that ties Carver's network to the county infrastructure that's been protecting it. Without him, Carver's lawyers can argue the federal surveillance was compromised by local involvement. With him, the case is sealed. Another pause. We need documentation of his communication with Carver's intermediary in the last 12 hours. Communication from his personal devices, not department equipment. Rowan waited. Kane's chapter knows where Kellner lives. They have eyes on him, but they can't approach. Any contact from an Iron Penance member gives Kellner grounds to claim entrapment. The agent's voice stayed level. We need a civilian. No, Rowan said. Ms. Vale, I have a 7-year-old daughter. I understand that. This would not require physical contact or proximity. Kellner has a vehicle he uses off-duty. The chapter can get you within range without being visible. You would need to place a device, it takes 40 seconds, and leave. You're asking a civilian waitress to run surveillance on a law enforcement officer. I'm asking someone who's already on Carver's radar, through no fault of her own, to do one thing that ends this before it gets worse. A pause. If we move without Kellner, we get Carver. The network fragments. Someone else picks up the pieces in 6 months. Kellner stays in his job. And you stay on whatever list you're on. The trailer was very quiet. Briggs knows about this ask, Rowan said. The pause lasted 1 second too long. He will be informed. Does he know? Rowan said. Silence. He told you not to ask me, Rowan said. Agent Kane. Mr. Kane expressed strong objections to civilian involvement. He was overruled on operational grounds. The agent's voice did not change in quality. We are not in the habit of involving civilians. This situation is not standard. No, Rowan said. It isn't. She looked at Sadie's door. She thought about Danny in an oversized jacket, about a trafficking network that had survived 10 years, about leverage and adjacent and the 40 seconds it would take, and the 6 months before someone else picked up the pieces. If I do this, she said, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, what happens to my daughter during those 40 seconds? She stays in the car. The chapter has 3 men covering the approach. She doesn't move. A pause. She will not be safer anywhere else tonight than in a vehicle surrounded by Iron Penance. Rowan thought about that, about the cold truth of it, about the specific terrible logic of being in a world where the safest option for your child was a ring of outlaw veterans in the dark. I want to talk to Briggs, she said. Now, before anything else. He called her back in 4 minutes. She could hear from his voice that he was already moving, already in the cold, already whatever the operational version of furious was. Contained, directional, completely controlled. I told her no, he said. I know. You don't have to do this. I know. Rowan. The word had a weight she hadn't heard from him. You have a daughter. I know I have a daughter, she said. That's why I'm asking you to tell me, honestly, not protectively, not the version where you've decided what I can handle. Tell me honestly if there is another way to end this that keeps her safe. The silence. Tell me, she said. If Kellner stays in place, he said carefully, there will be another approach. Not tonight. Maybe not this week. But Carver is patient, and you are now on a list, and patience ends. And the device, the 40 seconds. It's as clean as she's saying. The operation is clean, he said. The ask is wrong. Those aren't the same objection. He was quiet. Briggs, those aren't the same objection. No, he said quietly. They're not. She looked at Sadie's door. She looked at Thunder on the desk, one ear higher than the other, standing its crooked vigil in the dark. I'll do it, she said. Rowan, get your men in position. I'll meet you at the County Road Junction in 20 minutes. She stopped. And Briggs, if anything happens to my daughter, nothing will happen to your daughter. The way he said it had no room in it for alternatives, no space for any version where that sentence was not true. I will be between her and everything. She believed him. She got up. She dressed. She went to Sadie's room and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the small shape under the covers, the dark hair fanned on the pillow, the one red sneaker that had somehow migrated from the floor to the bedside table. She thought, this is the moment, right here, the moment before. She went in and she sat on the edge of the bed and she put her hand on Sadie's shoulder and she said quietly, Hey, we're going for a drive. Sadie opened her eyes with the immediate alertness of a child who had a mother who sometimes said things like this. Is it bad? She asked. No, Rowan said. It's just a thing I need to do, and then it's done. Sadie looked at her for a long moment in the dark. She had her father's eyes, a man who had left when she was 2, a man whose particular beauty of feature she'd inherited, and whose other qualities she thankfully had not. She looked at Rowan with those eyes and she said, Will Briggs be there? Yes, Rowan said. Okay, Sadie said, and got up. They drove out to the county road junction in the cold and the dark and found 3 motorcycles parked off the road in a line, engines off, dark. Briggs was at the front. He came to Rowan's window when she pulled up. He looked at Sadie in the passenger seat. Sadie looked at him. Hey, Sadie said. Hey, he said. He looked at Rowan. She saw what the look cost him. The specific cost of a man who had decided something about protecting people and was now watching that decision be overtaken by circumstance. 2 men stay with the car, he said. Sadie doesn't move. I go with you to the location. He paused. It's 2 minutes, total. You place it, and we leave. Rowan nodded. He put something in her hand, small, flat, slightly warm from his jacket pocket. The device. Left rear wheel well, he said. Magnetic. It goes on in one motion. You don't need to look. Touch the metal and release. She closed her hand around it. She looked at him. In the cold Nevada dark, with the stars overhead and the desert going on in every direction, and 2 strangers on motorcycles watching her child and a trafficking network and a deputy and a federal agent and a debt that had started with 8 crumpled dollars, she looked at the man across from her and said one thing. This ends tonight. Tonight, he said. She got out of the car. She walked with him into the dark, and she did not look back. Because looking back was the thing you did when you weren't sure you were doing the right thing, and she was sure, and the sureness was cold and clean and absolute. What she did not know, what neither of them knew yet, what Agent Castillo had not told them because she herself had only learned it 40 minutes earlier, was that Kellner's vehicle was not alone at the location. What she did not know was that Carver had moved faster than any of them had calculated. That the surveillance Castillo's team was running on Kellner had been countered, professionally, surgically, sometime in the last 6 hours. That the communication Castillo had intercepted was not Kellner reporting to Carver. It was Carver reporting to Kellner. And the address that had been reported was not Rowan's trailer. It was the secondary location where Danny was. Briggs's phone rang before they reached Kellner's street. He had it out in one motion, read the screen, and stopped walking. The stop was absolute. No deceleration, no transition, just moving and then not moving, the way a man stops when the information is bad enough to override everything else. Rowan stopped 2 steps ahead of him and turned. His face in the dark was a different face from any she had seen. Not the breaking thing from the diner, not the controlled stillness of the trailer visits. This was the face underneath all of those faces, stripped of everything that wasn't functional, everything that wasn't operational. A detective's face, a man calculating its speed in the dark. Briggs. He was already talking into the phone. How long ago? A pause. How many? Another pause, and his jaw tightened with the specific controlled force of a man who was not going to show what that answer cost him. Hold. Do not engage. Hold the position. He ended the call. Tell me, Rowan said. Danny's location, he said. Carver sent 3 men. Our guy there called it in 2 minutes ago. He was already moving back toward the road, back toward the motorcycles, and she was already moving with him because there was nothing else to move toward. The whole approach with Kellner, it was a draw. Get us out here. Away from the chapter. Away from Danny. He split your men. He knows how we work, said without bitterness. Just the acknowledgement of a man who had underestimated something and was not spending time on the feeling of that. They got back to the cars. Briggs was on the phone again before he reached his bike, talking to someone named Cole in short, stripped sentences that sounded like coordinates and numbers. Sadie was in the car with the 2 chapter men flanking it, exactly as she'd been left, and when Rowan pulled open the passenger door, Sadie looked at her with those eyes and said nothing. Change of plans, Rowan said. Stay buckled. She got in and started the car and looked at Briggs through the windshield. He held up 2 fingers and pointed east. She nodded. They drove east. The convoy was 4 vehicles, her car, Briggs, and the 2 men who had been watching Sadie, moving through the Nevada dark on county roads that had no streetlights and no traffic, and nothing in any direction but flat, cold desert and the hard white geometry of stars. Rowan drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on Briggs's taillight 30 feet ahead, and her peripheral vision on Sadie, who sat with her seatbelt on and Thunder the carved horse in both hands and said nothing. 10 minutes. 12. The roads narrowed. The location was a ranch house 7 miles outside town, a chapter member's property, off deed records, the kind of address that existed in the gap between official and actual. As they came off the last county road onto the dirt track leading to it, Rowan saw the lights. One of the outbuildings was on fire. Not fully, not the consuming roar of something that had been burning long, but the sharp, specific orange of something recently started, a tongue of it coming from the corner of the structure where the propane hookup was, and the light it threw made the yard into a theater of moving shadows. Briggs stopped his bike. She pulled up behind him. He came to her window. His face was orange lit and absolutely still. Stay here, both of you. Car stays running. You hear anything wrong is anyone you don't recognize coming toward this car. You drive. You don't stop. What's wrong? Sadie said from the passenger seat. Small fire, Briggs said directly to her. His voice changed when he spoke to Sadie. Not softer exactly, more honest. Our friends are putting it out. Is Danny here? She's here. Is she okay? A half beat. We're going to make sure. He looked at Rowan. Drive if you have to. Go, Rowan said. He went. She watched him cross the yard with the 2 chapter men and disappear around the side of the burning outbuilding, and then the yard was just the fire and the shadows and the sound of it. The particular low roar of controlled combustion that was different from the desert silence. The way a held breath was different from an easy one. Sadie was looking at the fire. Someone set that on purpose, she said. Why do you say that? Because it's only in one corner. She paused. To make people go outside. Rowan looked at her daughter, at 7 years old, doing tactical analysis in the dark. She thought about what kind of childhood produced that particular observation, and felt the specific grief of it move through her without time to stay. Stay buckled, Rowan said. Then she saw the man at the edge of the yard. He was not a chapter man. She didn't know how she knew that. The cut, the posture, something in the way he stood at the edge of the firelight, like someone who had set the stage and was now watching for his cue. He was looking at the ranch house, at the front door. He had something in his hand that she understood before she'd processed understanding it. She had her phone out. She called Briggs. He picked up on the second ring. What? East side of the yard? At the tree line. She kept her voice even. He has a weapon. Silence for 1 second. 2. How many? 1 visible. Color of jacket. Gray, dark gray. Another silence. Then, get Sadie down, now. She reached across and pushed Sadie below the dash with one hand, not hard but without room for discussion. And Sadie went without protest because she was her mother's daughter, and she understood now that this was the kind of moment that her mother's voice meant. The front door of the ranch house opened. A chapter man came out, big, moving fast, and the man at the tree line lifted his hand and Rowan heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize as her own voice. And then 2 things happened simultaneously in a way that her brain could not fully sequence afterward. Briggs came around the far corner of the outbuilding at a run. Not the careful managed movement she associated with him, but actual speed, the kind of speed that large men produced when the situation required it. And he hit the man at the tree line before the man had fully registered that there was a direction to look. The weapon discharged once, into the ground. The man went down. Briggs had him pinned in the dirt with a knee and one arm and was not hurting him beyond what was necessary to prevent him moving, which was a specific and trained restraint that she recognized even from this distance, even in firelight, because it did not look like violence, it looked like containment. 2 other chapter men materialized from the dark and flanked the position. Rowan was out of the car. She did not remember deciding to get out of the car. Briggs looked up from the man he was holding. I said stay. Where's Danny? She said. Inside. I need to see her. She was already moving toward the ranch house. I need Sadie to see that she's okay, or Sadie will not. Rowan, his voice, exactly what it needed to be. She stopped. She's okay. Cole has her. Back bedroom. She's okay. A pause. Get Sadie and bring her inside. Use the front door. She went back to the car. Sadie was already sitting up, already watching, already evaluating. Rowan opened the passenger door and held out her hand, and Sadie took it without being asked. And they walked across the yard in the firelight with the 2 chapter men flanking the pinned man in the dirt. And Rowan did not look at him. And Sadie did not look at him either. Inside the ranch house, dim light, wood heat, the smell of old carpet and gun oil and coffee that had been on too long. A man she knew as Cole, large, close-cropped gray hair, the bearing of someone who had once been very formal about bearing and had let it go to something quieter, was sitting on the floor of the back hallway with Danny in his lap. Danny was in her pajamas. Her braids from Briggs were mostly intact, one coming loose at the bottom. She was not crying. She was holding a cup of water in both hands and watching the door with the focused calm of a child who had decided that staying calm was the correct response and was maintaining it through sheer effort. She saw Sadie. Hi, Sadie said. Hi, Danny said. You okay? Danny considered this with the seriousness it deserved. There was a loud noise, she said. Cole said it was a car. It was, Cole said, to the room, to no one. Sadie sat down on the floor next to Danny as though this was a perfectly normal place to sit, and within 30 seconds they were talking about something else entirely. The conversation of children who process through the ordinary rather than the extraordinary, and Rowan stood in the hallway doorway and watched them, and felt something move through her chest that had no name she wanted to give it. Briggs came in behind her. She heard his step. One man, he said quietly. The other 2 were covering the rear. They ran when it went wrong for him. Castillo's team is moving on those addresses now. He paused. It's done. Carver. Castillo executed the warrant 20 minutes ago. He was very close behind her, not touching, just present. It's done, Rowan. She watched Sadie and Danny on the floor of the hallway. The man in the yard, she said. He was sent here for Danny. Yes. If we'd been 2 minutes later. We weren't. She turned around. He was right there, closer than she'd thought. The orange light from outside still on half his face through the window, and she looked at him fully for the first time in the context of all of it. The diner, the $5,000, the coffee, the gas station braids, the 40 seconds with the device, the run across the yard, all of it stacked and present. You got there in time, she said. We got there, he said. The we deliberate. From the hallway floor, Sadie's voice. Danny, do you want to see thunder? And Danny's voice, what's thunder? And Sadie, he's a horse. He's in my mom's pocket. Rowan reached into her jacket pocket and found the carved horse. She had put it there without thinking before they'd left the trailer, the same way she'd taken her keys and her phone, as though thunder was now simply a thing she carried. And she held it out around the doorframe without looking away from Briggs. Small hands took it. In the yard, the fire had burned down to a glow. Outside, on every approach road within 5 miles, the Iron Pennants chapter held their positions in the dark, engines off, waiting for the word. Briggs's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face did the thing. The calculation, the assessment, and then he looked up. "Castillo has Carver," he said, "and Kellner, both." Rowan let out a breath she had been holding since 3:47 in the morning. "It's not over," he said. "There are lawyers, processes. It takes time. But the men who were sent here tonight won't be sent again." She looked at him. "And Reyes, Danny's father." His face went to the careful place. "He cooperated with Castillo. Part of the deal. He's out of Danny's life. That's the condition." A pause. "Lisa, my sister, she's free of it. She's coming for Danny in 3 days." Rowan nodded. From the floor of the hallway, 2 children's voices murmured together in the warm dark of the ranch house, passing a carved horse back and forth between them, with the grave commerce of children who have decided something is worth sharing. Briggs looked at Rowan. Rowan looked at Briggs. In the yard outside, the last of the fire went out, and the darkness that replaced it was a different kind. Not the darkness of something approaching, not the darkness of something lying in wait, but the simple, ordinary dark of a Nevada winter night doing what Nevada winter nights do, vast and cold and indifferent and enormous and entirely without threat. That was how it ended. Not with a final confrontation, not with the sharp, clean edge of a thing resolved in a single moment, but with a fire going out in a yard in the Nevada desert, while 2 children passed a carved horse between them on a hallway floor. The legal machinery moved the way legal machinery moves, slowly, with the grinding impersonality of a system that does not know or care about the human weight of what it processes. Castillo's team executed 4 additional warrants in the week following the ranch house. Carver's operation, which had sustained itself for a decade through the particular genius of being both visible and invisible, legitimate contracts, county relationships, the social lubricant of knowing the right people, came apart with the specific speed of things that were always more fragile than they appeared. The trafficking network was not destroyed in a single night. Networks don't die that way. But it was broken, its key nodes removed, its local protection stripped by Kellner's arrest. The parts that remained would find it very difficult to reassemble under the new scrutiny. Carver himself was 63 years old and looked older in his arrest photograph, which Castillo texted to Briggs without comment. He wore the expression of a man who had known this was coming and had spent years believing he could keep it from arriving and had been wrong. That was the whole of what his face said. Kellner was processed separately. The deputy's career ended with a resignation that was accepted before charges were filed, in the careful choreography of institutions protecting themselves even as they released the individuals who had corrupted them. Rowan read about it in 2 paragraphs in the county paper and thought about the word commendation and felt the cold of it without surprise. Reyes, Danny's father, took the deal Castillo offered. He gave testimony. He disappeared from the legal record into the protective bureaucracy of cooperation agreements, which meant he did not go to prison for most of what he had done, which meant the justice was incomplete in the way that justice was almost always incomplete. Briggs told Rowan this plainly, without softening it. She had expected him to. She had come to understand that he did not soften things she was capable of bearing, which was its own form of respect. None of this took days. It took 3 weeks, and then 6 weeks. And then it was simply a thing that had happened and was happening and would continue to happen in courtrooms and depositions for another year at least. But the immediate danger, the thing that had been pointed at Danny, that had edged sideways toward Rowan and Sadie, that was gone. Not resolved. Gone. The distinction mattered. Lisa came for Danny on a Thursday. Briggs's sister was 34 and looked like him the way siblings sometimes look like each other. Not in the obvious features, but in the underlying structure, the bone, and the bearing. She was thinner than she should have been. She had the careful movements of someone whose body had been a site of bad things and was still in the process of reclaiming it. She came in a rental car, and she stood in the doorway of the ranch house, and she looked at her daughter sitting on the floor with Sadie Vale, the two of them deep in the construction of something architectural from a set of wooden blocks that Cole had found in a closet and presented with the diffident pride of a large man doing a small kind thing. Danny looked up at her mother. There are reunions that have sound, crying, voices, the dramatic architecture of relief. This one was quiet. Danny got up from the floor and walked to her mother, and Lisa knelt and held her, and the two of them stayed in that position for a long time without words, and everyone in the room found somewhere else to look. Briggs stood near the window with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the way it set when he was holding something at a distance. Rowan stood near him, not touching, and she watched his profile, and she understood without needing to be told that this was also complicated. The sister who had gotten herself into a situation that had endangered her child. The brother who had extracted them from it. The love that lived inside all of that like a coal under ash. When Lisa finally stood, she looked at Briggs and said, "Thank you." He looked at her for a moment. "You should have called me earlier." "I know. A lot earlier." "I know, Garrett." The name landed differently from his sister's mouth. Rowan had not known his first name was Garrett. She held it quietly. "I was trying to handle it." "You couldn't handle it. I know that now." A silence, the kind between siblings that contains years. "She needs consistency," he said. "Routine, the same thing every day for a while." "I know what she needs." "I'm telling you anyway." Lisa looked at him with a combination of irritation and gratitude that was entirely familial. "I know you are." She paused. "I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay." He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded once. That was the whole of it. Danny hugged Rowan before they left. She came up to Rowan's hip and put both arms around her and pressed her face into Rowan's jacket, and Rowan put her hand on the child's back and felt the small, alive warmth of her. "Bye," Danny said. "Bye, kiddo," Rowan said. Danny went to Sadie next. They regarded each other with the serious equality of children who have been through something together without fully understanding what it was. "You can keep Thunder for a while," Sadie said. Danny looked at the carved horse she'd been holding since the night before. "He's yours." "I know, but you can keep him for a while." Danny thought about this. "Okay," she said. "I'll bring him back." "I know," Sadie said, with absolute confidence. They watched the rental car pull out of the ranch property and onto the dirt track, and then it was just the Nevada morning, clear and cold and pale blue at the edges where the sky came down to meet the desert. Briggs stood in the yard watching the road long after the car was gone. Rowan stood a few feet away and let him have it. After a while, he turned around and looked at her and said, "You want coffee?" "Yes," she said. They went inside. The weeks that followed had a different texture from the weeks before. Not peaceful, exactly. The legal process continued, depositions were scheduled, Castillo called twice with procedural questions, and the ordinary machinery of survival still ran exactly as it had before. Rowan worked her shifts. Sadie went to school. The coffee tin was replenished slowly in the way it was always replenished, by the small accretion of money that was neither debt nor luxury, but simply sustenance. But something had shifted in the quality of the days. She noticed it the way you noticed a change in air pressure. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to, but in the accumulated evidence of how things felt. She slept better. She had not realized how badly she'd been sleeping until she began sleeping well again, until she woke at 6 rather than 5 without the braced quality that had accompanied waking for, she counted backward, at least 2 years. Maybe longer. Sadie had a different ease too. Hard to name. She still did fractions and braided her own hair imperfectly and talked to Thunder when she thought she was alone. Rowan had heard her, through the bedroom door, conducting what seemed to be a long and detailed conversation about school that the horse was expected to find interesting. She still had the particular gravity that she'd had since she was very small, the seriousness of a child who had absorbed something from her circumstances and processed it into a quality of attention that adults sometimes found unnerving. But there was more laughter now, small laughter, domestic laughter, the kind that came at supper over nothing in particular, over a word that sounded funny or a memory that surfaced unexpectedly. The laughter of a household that had some room in it. Briggs came by twice in the weeks after. Not the careful operational visits of before. He came on a Saturday morning when there was no agenda and sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and read part of the county paper and talked to Sadie about horses. Actual horses. She'd become interested in them now with the specific intensity she brought to new subjects. With the patience and detail of someone who knew more about horses than you would have expected and was willing to deploy all of it for a 7-year-old. He stayed 2 hours. He left when he had a chapter meeting. He did not make it into anything. The second visit he brought Cole, who came inside for the first time and sat in the corner of the kitchen with a coffee and said very little and seemed, by the end of it, more comfortable than when he'd arrived. Cole had the quality of a man who needed to establish that a space was safe before he relaxed in it, which was a quality Rowan understood in the specific way you understood things you shared. After Cole left, Sadie said, "He's sad." "A little," Rowan said. "Did something happen to him?" "Something happened to a lot of them," Rowan said. "A long time ago. They're still figuring out what to do with it." Sadie considered this with the appropriate seriousness. "Like when I was scared of the dark for a long time after we moved here." "Like that," Rowan said. "Just bigger." It was spring when she finally asked Briggs about the night at the diner. The real version. Not the facts of it. She had the facts, but the underneath of it. They were sitting on the stoop of the trailer in the late afternoon, which had become something they did when he visited, sitting outside with coffee while the desert did its slow April transformation, and Sadie's voice came through the window at intervals. "You hadn't eaten," she said. "No." "Before the diner. How long?" He looked at the coffee. "Day and a half, maybe." "Because you'd spent everything." "Because I'd done something stupid," he said. A month before that, I'd given a woman in the chapter a loan. Not a chapter loan, personal, because she needed to get her kids out of a bad situation and the chapter fund was dry. I didn't have it to give, really, but I gave it. He paused. And then my bike needed a part, and I had the part money, but not the part money and the eating money both. She was quiet for a moment. "The night at the diner. You were coming from something." "Meeting with a contact who had information about Carver." He stopped. The associates who did the jaw were Carver's men. They'd been watching the contact. When they saw me with him, they decided to send a message. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. "I walked to the diner because I didn't want to ride until I knew my head was clear." With a bruised jaw and no money and a day and a half without eating, it seemed like a reasonable plan at the time. She looked at the desert, at the pale spring grass starting at the edges of the gravel where nothing had grown in the fall. And Sadie's money. He was quiet. "What did it do to you?" she said. "Actually," he took a breath. "Let it out." "I've been in bad spots. Money, I mean. After I left the department. There were months when it wasn't good. And I'd gotten to a place where I thought I knew what humiliation felt like. Thought I'd mapped the whole territory of it." He paused. "And then a 7-year-old put her toy money on a counter for me and said, 'Don't yell at my mom.' And I realized I hadn't understood anything." The afternoon light moved across the trailer park in long gold angles. "She wasn't doing it for you," Rowan said. "She was doing it for me." "I know," he said. "That was the part I couldn't get past." She looked at him. At his profile in the evening light, the jaw that had healed clean, the hands around the mug. The man under the patch. The detective who couldn't live with what he'd seen. The veteran of something that had no name in any official record. "You were going to square it," she said, "even if Sadie hadn't been there. You would have come back." He thought about this, turned the mug again. "Yeah," he said. "I would have. Because of the code." "Because it was the right thing," he said. "The code is just us agreeing about what the right thing is." He paused. "Some of us don't have a lot left, but we've got that." She nodded. They sat in the evening with their coffee going cold and the desert going gold around them. "Briggs?" she said. "Yeah, what you and the chapter did for us. What it cost, the surveillance, the risk, Danny, all of it." "You paid first," he said simply. $8. $8, he agreed. She thought about this, about the specific mathematics of it, about a 7-year-old who had understood something instinctively that most adults spent their whole lives trying to reason their way to. That you gave what you had when someone needed it, and you didn't calculate the return, and the world you got back from that was different from the world you started with. She's going to be something, Briggs said of Sadie. Not a question. She already is something, Rowan said. Through the trailer window, Sadie's voice came out into the spring evening. She was reading to herself, the particular rhythm of a child reading aloud for the pleasure of the sound, her lips always slightly ahead of her voice. Briggs finished his coffee. He stood. He put on his jacket. He stood at the edge of the stoop for a moment with his back to her in the way she had come to recognize. The saying of something without the full facing of it. "I'll be around," he said, "if that's all right." She looked at his back, at the canvas jacket, at the line of his shoulders, which carried things she had learned the names of and things she hadn't yet. "That's all right," she said. He nodded once. He went to the bike. He started it, the sound filling the trailer park for a moment, warm and mechanical and entirely itself. And he pulled out of the lot and onto the county road and headed back toward whatever waited for him there. She watched his taillight until the road curved and it disappeared. The spring evening settled over the park. The raven that lived in the electrical tower at the far end of the lot called once and went quiet. The pale new grass moved at the gravel's edge. Rowan sat on the stoop for a while longer. She thought about the coffee tin above the refrigerator. $840, then more, then the process of building it back, month by month, the slow arithmetic of slightly more than manageable becoming, finally, almost enough. She thought about the serpentine belt, replaced in January, about Sadie's field trip, about the weaker strip on the front door she had finally fixed herself with a kit from the hardware store, about the way small repairs accumulated into something that felt, from the inside, like forward motion. She thought about this wooden horse. Danny had sent it back 2 weeks ago, with a card that Sadie had read 7 times and then put in her desk drawer with the seriousness of a document. The card said, "I looked after Thunder. He is good. Thank you, Sadie." From Danny. The handwriting was careful and slightly large, the way first-grade handwriting was, each letter a considered project. Thunder was back on the desk next to Sadie's homework, one ear higher than the other, standing its crooked sentry watch over the fractions and the spelling lists and the drawings and the small daily accumulation of a childhood that was not perfect, had never been perfect, but was being lived with a fullness that Rowan had not always known how to provide and was learning, still, by degrees. She went inside. Sadie was at the kitchen table now, homework spread in front of her, pencil moving with purpose. She did not look up when Rowan came in. "He left?" she said. "He left." "Is he coming back?" "He said he would." Sadie nodded, satisfied, and went back to the homework. Rowan made dinner. She made the pasta dish that Sadie liked, the one with the vegetables cut small the way she preferred them, and she put the good music on. The playlist her mother had made for her years ago, old country, not sad country, the kind that moved. And the trailer filled with the smell of something warm on the stove, and the sound of something that had been around long enough to carry comfort. They ate at the kitchen table, the two of them, the wobble still in the table's short leg, but less pronounced now with the better cardboard she'd cut to size in January. After dinner, Sadie did the last of the homework. Rowan did the dishes. The ordinary machinery of an evening, running as it ran, with the small hum of routine that was not the hum of fear or scarcity, but simply the hum of life going on in its unremarkable human way. Before bed, Sadie stood in the kitchen door with Thunder in both hands. "Mom," she said. "Yeah." When Danny sent Thunder back, she said she looked after him. She turned the horse in her hands. She did. He came back in exactly the same condition. "She's careful," Rowan said. "She said he helped." Sadie looked at the horse. "When she was scared." Rowan dried her hands on the dish towel. She looked at her daughter. "Things like that help," she said. "Having something from someone who cares about you." Sadie considered this. Then, "Is that why Briggs made him? Because he cared?" Rowan thought about a man going home in the dark after a diner, after a bruised jaw and an empty wallet, and the specific humiliation of being seen at the bottom of things, and taking out a knife and a piece of wood and working through the night on something small and careful for a child he barely knew. About what that act required of a person, about what it said about what was still intact in them when other things had broken. "Yeah," she said. "That's why." Sadie looked at Thunder for a moment more. Then she put him back in the desk nook the way she always put him back, adjusted slightly so he faced the room, his crooked ears level with the edge of the lamp. "Good night, Thunder," she said. To the horse, meaning it. She went to bed. Rowan sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. The bills were paid. The tin had money in it. The front door sealed against the spring draft. Outside, the Nevada dark was doing its endless open work, stars moving on their ancient geometry, the desert breathing its cold, clean breath, the highway somewhere out there running its long, indifferent line through all of it. Somewhere on that highway, a Harley engine moved through the dark, distant, fading, going wherever it went next. She listened until she couldn't hear it anymore. Then she turned off of the kitchen light, and the trailer settled into the easy dark of a house where no one was afraid, and the coffee tin sat above the refrigerator with money in it, and the wooden horse stood its watch in the lamplight of a 7-year-old's room, and Rowan Vale sat for a little while in the good dark and let herself feel, for the first time in longer than she could account for, the particular and unremarkable grace of a life that had come through something and was still standing. Not unscathed, not unchanged. Standing. The debt was settled. The ledger was closed. And in the trailer park off Route 93, in a forgotten corner of Nevada that no map bothered to name, a mother and her daughter were no longer surviving the days. They were living them. That was all. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything.